We've been looking at the development of the church, but this time the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. We've been looking at the beliefs of the church as they have developed, and especially the seven sacraments. We also looked yesterday at the whole issue of relics. Today we're going to finish up this section by looking at the warriors of the church, who are considered to be the warriors of the church. What are the distinctions between them? And really this comes about because people have begun to make a sharp distinction between the common people of the church and those that are the leaders of the church. So whereas in the early church, the beginnings of the church, everyone was looked upon as being the same, even though there were spiritual leaders called elders, they didn't look at themselves as being a higher rank than anybody else. They simply were the ones that exercised oversight, a pastoral care, a shepherding of the people that were gathered together in the church. But by the time we get in the Middle Ages, we have a definite system of separation. And largely this comes about as a result of Constantine's influence in legalizing the church, and then the church becoming the official state church, and all the pagans that came into the church and the influence they had on them, because they had this definite distinction between clergy and laity. So in the Roman Catholic Church, as it has come to be in the Middle Ages, we have distinctions between different kinds of people in the church. The first designation of people is called the laity. I've already mentioned that word, laity, or L-A-Y, layman, like that, refers to the common church members. So just the everyday people that are part of the church are called laity. Any questions about that? Have you heard that word before, the laity, or someone being a layman? Anybody heard that? No? The next distinction is then called the clergy. The clergy are considered to be the only servants of the church. They are the enlisted men of the church, if you will, or the elite warriors of the church. They're the ones that do the real church work. Everybody else is just kind of observing and comes to services, participates in the sacraments to get salvation, but they're not really doing the work of the church or the work of the ministry or the work of Jesus Christ. It's these special elite warriors that are doing the work of Christ. Now, why would someone want to become a part of the clergy? Why would someone want to become a part of this elite group? Well, there are several motivations of those that entered into the clergy. The first one was ambition. What's ambition? What does that word mean? Do any of you have ambition? What is ambition? John?
A feeling to do something.
Feeling to do something, add more to that. A feeling that you want to do something what?
Good.
Okay, or well. Do something well in order to
Feel better about yourself, or succeed.
To succeed, to be successful, right? So some people saw getting into the church as clergy as a way to be successful in life. It's a way to have a position of prestige, to be someone that people look up to. So some became clergy out of ambition. Another motive for joining the clergy was the prospect of wealth, luxury, and power. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think of that today, except in maybe some churches, or if you can get a TV ministry. But back then, as the church gained more and more power in the world around them, in Europe especially, church leaders could also gain some of that. And if you are a member of the clergy and work your way up to positions of authority, you might actually become wealthy through that. And certainly, you would have power over other people if, as I said, you worked your way up the hierarchy. Any questions? All right, the next motivation for becoming clergy was it was a haven from personal or family problems. So if you were in a large family and you had trouble getting along with your parents or with your siblings, you might just say, I'm going to get away from it all, I'm going to go join the church. I'm going to become a clergyman. Or maybe you're just having personal problems. You know, you're not sure what you want to do in life. You're conflicted about yourself. Maybe you have trouble getting along with other people. All kinds of things might lead a person to say, I'm just going to get away and I'll become a clergyman. I'll join the servants of the church. All right. Any questions about that as a motivation? Now, thus far, would you say that these motives for becoming a clergyman are the best of motives?
No.
Doesn't sound like they're joining for the right reason, does it? Primarily. But there were some who did join out of a sincere desire to serve God. I don't want to paint it as all black, as all gloomy, as everybody had bad intentions. There were some who had a sincere desire to serve God. They really wanted to do something that would serve God and serve people. All right, any questions then about the motives for people becoming members of the clergy? All right, now once you did that, there were a couple of branches of service. In other words, there was a division within the clergy that you might find yourself. First of all, there was what was called secular clergy. Secular is the Latin word for world. So this kind of clergy were the ones that conducted religious services, administered the sacraments to the laity, and supervised the business and property of the church. So a secular clergyman would be the one who is involved with the world in the sense that they're the ones that have contact with people. They're the ones that are conducting the services for people. They're the ones that are administering the sacraments to the people, conduct the business affairs of the church. So they're clergy, but they have a lot of contact with the world. That's why they're called secular clergy. Any questions? Next we come to what's called the regular clergy. Regular is the Latin for rule. These clergymen renounced the world. Whereas the secular clergy have a lot of contact with the world, with people, these want to get away from the world. And they live a life of solitude and study. They live in monastic communities under strict regulations, just like we saw before among those hermits who then became monks and lived in monasteries. This is following in that tradition, getting away from the world. And although it varied from time to time, eventually they come to accept 3 vows when they enter into being a regular clergyman. First of all, the vow of poverty, to promise to be poor, to not accumulate luxury or wealth. Chastity, which means they would promise not to have sexual relations. And then thirdly, they would promise to be obedient to the abbot, who is the leader of the monastery. All right, do you have any questions about these vows? And of course, these come originally from Benedictines, or Benedict, Benedict, had a hard time saying his name, Benedict, and it's called the Benedictine vow. although his original vow was a little bit different, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just accept this as the predominant set of vows that would be taken upon entering a monastery. All right, no questions? All right, let's look at the activities of a person who was a regular clergyman. First of all, he would participate in manual labor. So most of them would be expected to go out and work. Maybe it's working in the fields, maybe it's working with animals, maybe it's building a road, all kinds of manual labor that might be expected of a person who was a monk or a regular clergyman. Second, they would be expected to spend time in study, studying God's Word, maybe even studying other literature. Thirdly, they would partake in religious services. So a number of times a day, they would be called in to the chapel and conduct a religious service there. And then fourthly, they would participate in prayer by themselves and with others as well. So that would be the way that a regular clergyman would organize his life, or it would be organized for him. He would spend part of the day doing manual labor, part of the day studying, part of it involved in religious services, and part of it in prayer. And this would vary according to the particular kind of monastery, the order, the monks, maybe the monk's own abilities, and so on. All right, do you have any questions about the regular monk, the vows that he would take, and the activities in which he would be engaged? All right, let's take a look at a common monastery setup. Here is the abbey. That would be the main building where they would meet together for worship services and so on. The person who's in charge of the abbey is the abbot, and that's his house here. There's a school here. This might have been for those outside the monastery to come and be taught by monks. They might have a school in that way. A guest house, because travelers coming through might want to stay over. A fish pond. You can see fields here. Here's the physician's house. There's a garden specifically for the hospital, because there's certain herbs you want to have on hand for certain kinds of ailments. Here's the hospital. Church for the novices and the ill. So if you're sick, you can't maybe go over here to the big building. They would have a service there, as well as those that maybe were just entering into the clergyhood. Here's a cemetery right next to the kitchen garden. I'm not sure what I would think about that. Those that are working in the kitchen go out to the garden and they look over and see the dead people. Maybe the dead people here provided some seepage into the soil and provided fertilizer. I don't know, but that's kind of an odd thing. The fowl keeper's house is here. What's a fowl keeper? What does he keep?
Birds.
Birds, right. So it'd be like what?
Fowl.
Well, what are fowl?
Birds.
What kind of birds might he keep? What kind of birds would you want to have here?
Oh, chicken.
Next to the kitchen.
Chicken.
Chickens. Yes. Here's a granary, in which is kept what?
Grain.
Grain. Good. The latrine. What's the latrine for? What's a latrine?
Bathroom breaks.
Right. Exactly. Next door to the bathhouse. Workshops here. Stables. The horses. Livestock over here. Cows. Oxen maybe. Here's a bakery. Kitchen right here for the bakery. This is called a cloister, where they would gather together, an open air area. Dormitory would be where they would what?
Sleep.
Sleep, right. They would have, most often what I've seen, a single room, concrete floor, sometimes a bed, sometimes not. Sometimes they would just sleep on the floor. Here's a storehouse, a traveler's lodging here as well. They might have servants living there. That'd be their quarters. And so that's the total layout of a monastery. So not all of them were this big. Some were maybe even bigger, but it's a general viewpoint of the monastery. All right, does anything surprise you here among the buildings?
I think it's small town kind of.
It's like a small town, right? And it functioned that way. Everything they needed was done right there. They didn't have to go get anything anywhere else because they lived very simply, so they didn't need a lot. But basically food, clothing, things like that, and it was all right there. Good observation. Anything else? Anything else stand out to you? Hey, would you be interested to know what kind of schedule they kept? Well, here's a sample. Here's the winter schedule. Get up at 2:30 a.m. for what's called night office, and which is at 3. That would include prayers for the royal family and for the dead. So you're getting up at the dead of night, you might say, to pray for the dead. And you probably feel dead when you're getting up at that hour, right? So it looks like you're praying for a couple hours there, and then you spend time at 5 a.m. in reading. 6 a.m. You have another time of prayer, it looks like. 7:30, more reading. 8 o'clock, you finally wash for the day and change your clothes. And you have a mass where you all meet together. 9:45, you go to work, whatever your work is. At noon, you come together and you sing mass. 1:30, apparently, no, I don't think that's free time. I think that stands for something. I just don't know what it is. These are Latin terms for what's being done there. So 1:30 to 2, I'm not sure what's going on there. 2 o'clock, you have dinner. What happened to breakfast?
There was no breakfast.
It didn't seem like there was one, was there? So you have dinner at 2, work again, 2:45. At 4:15, Vespers, which is another kind of church service. Then at 5:30, you change into your night shoes. And then some different meetings go on at 6, 6:15, and then you go to bed at 6:30, which you need to do if you're getting up at 2:30, right? That's in the winter. Because it's getting dark about then anyway. So what do you think? Would that be a good schedule for you?
No. Actually, yeah, no.
Why did you think on it? That's terrible.
Yeah, Griff, you had to think about it. All right, that's the winter schedule.
No.
So what do you think? You think the summer schedule is better or worse?
Worse.
Why?
Because I bet they stay up longer to work.
Yeah. Summer schedule, but you don't get up, well, you get up at 1:30 now. A little earlier. You get up at 1:30 a.m.
That's when I went to bed.
Same thing at 2, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning you change and wash. 5 o'clock you read. 6 o'clock is mass. 7:30 a.m. you work. Go to mass again at 8. There's reading. And dinner at noon. So it's moved up from 2, so it's earlier in the day. So that's something to look forward to. And look, now you get a siesta. You get to take a little nap in the afternoon. In the summer, why? Why in the summer?
You wake up.
What?
It's hot.
John? It's hot. Yeah. So it's too hot to work. And at 2:30, apparently you get a drink. I'm not sure how that is. 3 o'clock you work again. 5:30 you have supper. 6 o'clock Vespers meeting. 7:30 p.m. So this is an hour later you change into your night shoes and go to bed at 8:15. So what's that, about 2 hours later or an hour or so later you go to bed and you're getting up about an hour earlier. So does that look any better in summer?
No. I like 6 hours of sleep, actually.
All right. Here is a picture of Gregory the First, Gregory the Great, whom we talked about before. I don't know why the picture appears here, but here he is. He's considered the first pope, although he didn't take that name. He's the one that introduced so much of what became Roman Catholic theology. And so here's where we are, where we have been. We started out in the ancient church, and now we're moving up into the medieval church. So we're in the process of the early Middle Ages and seeing how the church has developed to that point. And we will continue on then as we go through the Middle Ages from here. But right now, we are ready to take a quiz over what we have studied thus far under growth of the medieval church, which has to do with the medieval church growing in the Middle Ages. So tomorrow we're having a quiz over that. So go back to the beginning of your notes on this section, which begins in as chapter 7, the making of medieval Europe. So essentially this quiz is over chapter 7, the making of medieval Europe, and essentially you see the first Roman numeral there is growth of the medieval church. That's what we're looking at. So we're looking at the head of the church, how the papacy became strong, how Rome became the primary leader of the church, Gregory the First, Gregory the Great, what he contributed to the church. So look at his work, the things that he came up with, some of the things that were true of him. Make sure you look over his theology, understand what he believed, that he was semi-Pelagian, and if you don't know what that is, look at the details there concerning Gregory the Great. Notice in anthropology and soteriology, remember that he is the one that made purgatory a doctrine of the church, made tradition of the fathers equal authority with the scriptures. He's the one that changed the Lord's table into Mass, stressed praying to the saints, stressed the doctrine of penance. So you can see that largely what became the 7 sacraments go to Gregory. He's the one that innovated much of this, much of the practice of the Roman Catholic Church from then on to the present day. You know, much of what the Roman Catholic Church believes and practices today can be traced back to Gregory. So a very important figure. We talked about the emergence of the claims of primacy of Rome. How is it that the Bishop of Rome claimed to have primacy over the other bishops? And so we looked at the Petrine theory, that Peter was the original pope. We looked at falsified documents that were presented as evidence that the Bishop of Rome should have control over the rest of the church, specifically the donation of Constantine and the Isidorian decretals. Make sure you look over that. And then most recently we looked over the Roman sacramental system, the 7 sacraments of the church. So make sure that you know what they are and can define them or match them with, at least with their definitions. And then you should know something about the relics that we spent some time looking at. And then of course what we went over today, looking at the warriors of the church, the division between different kinds of people in the church. What are the laity, what are the clergy, and what are the 2 different kinds of clergy, and something about what they did, of course, their vows. All right, so that's all there is to it. If you have been keeping up with the notes and explaining them to someone else, this should be easy peasy. If you have not taken my advice, then you will need to study hard tonight for the quiz tomorrow. Do you have any questions? All right, we can take the rest of the time for you to look over your notes. If you want to ask each other questions, you may, but probably a good idea to look through the notes first to remind yourself of what's there. All right, you may do that.